So, Denise, tell us a bit about your education in London and also the connection to St Martin's.
Well, you should want to know first that I came from South Africa, had a lot of education there, and gave me certain preoccupations which went very well with what I found in London with the socialist government and all the questioning that was being done then. And out of that came people like the brutalists, Peter and Alison Smithson, and in Europe, Team 10, a parallel movement. And so I slipped rather well into all of that, having had an early modern education in architecture because my mother was an architecture student. So I've been involved in architecture since the age of 2, and I literally mean it, because we built a house and I remember the blueprints from when I was 2, and that was 1930s Cubist modernism.
So in London you went to the AA.
I went to the AA. I went there and said, I'm going home because I was in an internship year, which meant I could travel. I was expecting to go back to Wits University, where Robert Scott Brown was a fellow student, and we were in love, and I wanted to go back to him. And I said, but I had thought maybe I should go to the AA, and they said, the entrance exam is next Wednesday. So I took that entrance exam, and then I got in. And then I began to think, what should I do? What's pushing me? And I decided that fate was sort of pushing me that direction. Of course, it was a life decision, but I didn't know that at the time.
And when you were at the Architecture Association, you did life drawing classes at St Martin's.
That's true, but it was a very small piece of what I did. But on Wednesday evenings, we went down the street, as I remember. I doubt whether St Martin's is still there now.
It's not.
Yes, well, it was nice, and it was an art school, just full of stuff. And I'd never done life drawing. And it's interesting because how I reacted was kind of like I would react now. This is a very interesting social situation. Look at this guy looking at this beautiful young woman and talking about cubist, straight lines and circles. He was being a kind of a cubist while looking at this very sexy lady. And I looked around. Does anyone else notice that she's very sexy? No, they're all drawing away. And were there other people? Yes, there were some people looking in at windows. And I was taking in all of this scene. And so that's what's indelible in my mind. I don't think I learned very well to do life drawing.
That doesn't matter. If it's a social situation, I'm sure that was good.
Yes, it was nice, and the atmosphere was very nice too.
So for us, it's a nice kind of, not completion of the circle, but beginning to come back, because we're giving you an honorary degree today. So what does an honorary degree mean to you?
An honorary degree means recognition, and that's lovely. I think you won't want to include this, but I think that they are also there for the benefit of the school and to lend renown to the school and money. In America, it would be very much part of fundraising. And that's necessary, it's important. And the fact that private people want to be involved in civic causes is a good thing, not a bad thing. So all of that is good. But sometimes you can feel, well, maybe it doesn't have much to do with the students. So I look for ones where I feel the students will like it. And I look to try to think, what would I have needed someone to say to me at that age to help me for the rest of my career?
So what would you? So out in the audience are 3,000 people, 1,000 graduates across all disciplines. What would your words of advice to those students be?
If you think life is chaos and there's no structure to it and you don't know what you're doing, that's what I felt at the AA. And my student advisor, Arthur Korn, saw this little girl from South Africa struggling and not knowing anyone and not knowing where she was. And he took me for coffee at Debris once a week on Fridays. And I talked about this need for structure in my life, and he talked about the November group. And Arthur Korn was always the youngest among these, you see, in his nice German accent. And I loved Arthur Korn. And so in the end, I didn't resolve it there. I'm sure he resolved something, talking about the November group, but I started to get impassioned, and then that thing slipped into place. And at the end of my career, I say my 3 careers on 3 different continents nested beautifully into each other. At the end of my life, they make a lot of sense. So be patient.
Okay, so let's get back to some questions about your work. In this lovely book, Having Words, you collect together all your writings. And so I'm interested in the afterword in particular. You talk about the importance of writing. So could you just tell us a bit more about the interconnection between what you write and what you do and how you learn?
Can I correct you a moment?
Yep.
I would say that's well under 5% of all my writings.
Okay.
I've done an awful lot of writing one way and another.
Okay, I stand corrected. I'll ask the question again. So we'll cut the first question. We'll go to the proper question. So let's talk a bit about your work, Denise. In this book, which collects together a small part of your writing across the years, you make the point at the end about how writing is important to you. So could you just talk a bit about how your writing and theory building relates to the practice elements and design elements of your work?
Tom Weaver, the wonderful editor of this book, pushed me to write that article when he heard what I was saying about writing. And Bob and I both share this feeling that there was a time when we wanted to practice and we wanted to build, and our ability lay in many levels, including big projects, and we didn't have the support to do it. We didn't have clients. Milton said, that one talent which is death to hide lodged with me useless. I felt that strongly about Bob, me to some extent. That made us write, because if you can't do it, you can write about it. And then the other thing is it made us teaching. And Milton says, they also serve who only stand and wait. We weren't exactly standing and waiting when we were teaching. We were preparing, teaching ourselves how to practice in a way that was rather unusual by running studios on things like Las Vegas. So the words are all part of that. The words are necessary when you also have to try to find work, and you need good wordsmiths to help you explain your projects in ways that clients will understand. We have had some very good English majors who do things like that with us. So there's many, many ways in which we've written. This semi-autobiographical, writing a parable technique, I think I learned that about the age of 50. I began to want to look back and learn from what I've done and tell people about it. But I find that if I want to teach students difficult material, and oh boy, they don't want to study sociology. So if I say, look, this is the difficulty I had with that field, and here were my problems, they understand it more. They sort of say, if a fool like Denise can do it, then I can do it. So writing has that effect as well.
So in one of the early studios you did, out of it came Learning from Las Vegas, which for me is really one of the seminal books on architecture and culture, in as much as it turns its focus from the normal obsessions with high art and looks very carefully at the urban scene. So do you think that the lessons from Las Vegas have been learned? I mean, they've obviously been learned by you, but do you think that the broader lessons have actually been captured within the architectural and cultural community?
Probably not in the way I would like. I see people going to some of the simpler projects we did, like building coverage along the Strip in 1966, and they'll do one building coverage along the Strip in 1982. And that's easy to do, but how about the other ones when we took, now I have to use semi-mathematical language, we took cogent variables that we decided this is what really explains the Strip. It might have been land use, it might have been property values, it might have been words in the signs, various things that we imagined should be worked out, and overlaid them. It's a process of meshing. And you see what comes out of that combined pattern. So that's the first thing that you do that's not as simple as just laying out one variable. Well, they haven't got that far yet. what do we learn when we put two things together and see what happens?
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it in many ways. I recently did it with the chapters of complexity and contradiction. And I said, how many times is the word complexity mentioned in each chapter, and how many times is the word contradiction mentioned in each chapter? And I found that in the middle, it was almost only contradiction all the way through. And at the beginning and the end, it was a whole lot more complexity. And I could relate that to how Bob came to learn about complexity through the work I was doing in planning and with systems people, where all over the university the word complexity was being debated, except in architecture. And you see this two shapes of pattern which tell you what happened to Bob. He became very influenced by the things I was doing at that time, when everyone thinks we weren't even working together.
But don't you think, I mean, I just think that learning about Las Vegas marked a really important shift in sensibility, which allowed architectural culture to get off its high horse, and it allowed it to get away from the strictures and orthodoxies of modernism.
I would agree with you, except I think in England they haven't. And there's nothing more inflexible than old revolutionaries. And the people that I was at school with and my good friends there wrote me letters saying, how can you like that awful stuff? And they're still saying that, and it's how many years later? And in the end, there was a sin called zealotry for false causes. Jane Jacobs first pointed out that that was a sin in architecture. Herbert Gans pointed it out a lot better, but architects read Jane Jacobs, at least they read one. But for the most part, they have not listened to that, and they think we are still the Antichrist for what we do.
And do you think that's damaged your reputation or enhanced your reputation?
It made it hard for us to find work. And then later we were able to find work. And then later we found some of the best work in the world, like Bob Venturi, when we got the National Gallery project. He said, I'm the happiest architect in the world.
But in terms of a generational shift, if the old revolutionaries are stuck in their ways, don't you think that not so much the young revolutionaries, but the young thinkers have actually captured on to much of what you've written and done in your life?
I think that young thinkers have, and when our son Jim went to Columbia, he found that all his teachers, and none of them were in architecture or planning, seemed to have read. In other words, the young professors in the fields he was in had read Learning from Las Vegas. And of course they didn't read Complexity and Contradiction. But this one had a meaning for them. And you see, that was largely due to my African training, which said, what's wrong with, first of all, the way in which we like our landscape, but going on, the fact that African painting, which is beautiful as folk painting, is also being taken up in the outskirts of industrial mining, Johannesburg. They will take now not a gourd and put beads round it, but a Coca-Cola bottle. And here we have one. Beautiful.
It's fantastic.
Pop bottle, soda pop bottle. It's not Coca-Cola, I think. These have all got messages that say, I love you, I will see you on Wednesday. Different things like that. They're little billboards. Well, we became very interested in things like this, and then transferred that sensibility to Las Vegas.
Right.
Impure art, communication, and then there's also a rather knowing Coca-Cola executive who was also a South African lawyer, brought us that. He said, I'm sure you will like that. And he was right.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yes. So anyway, that sensibility grew out of my African heritage.
That's fascinating.
Yes. You see, I have pictures of my grandmother, and she's 18 and she's in Riga, and she's wearing a beautiful, Gibson girl hairstyle, Edwardian dress with pearls on the lace and things like that. Then the next one, she's in Africa and she's cooking over an open stove with those three-legged pots that came from Manchester. And the houses they live in are African huts in the background. And it's just a move like that in 1903. And so we are ethnics in the wilderness. And the whole feeling of my mother had for Africa is very much part of what I am too. And then it goes into saying it's not just the folk art, it's not coming from Germany, which many people did in the 30s, refugees, and they discovered Africans and they began to be like Gauguin, you see, the noble savage and all of that. Just some of them were socialist and they drew laborers laboring in the mines. And then we discovered, we had a Dutch Jewish art teacher who said, you won't be creative unless you paint what you see around you. And she saw picturesque scenes of people selling flowers in front of City Hall. We found things like that pottery and other mixed arts like that. The Mapach tribe, the Mapach nation, I'm sure you'd say now, in the northern Transvaal, who did Arabic entrances 1,000 years old, because they must have come from the north, and also finger painting and hand painting, which depict suburban houses they see around them, right down to the street numbers.
Okay.
The mixture, and I was very, very influenced by all that.
So in the room back there, along the top shelf, you have some African artifacts with some on the right, and then some pop artifacts on the left. So it's that kind of connection that goes on. Let's turn to an article in here, which Sexism and the Star System, which for many of my students and my colleagues is an incredibly important, both male and female, I should say, incredibly important article. So first of all, could you just say a bit about what you were doing in the article, and then whether you think anything has changed?
I was aware, South Africa had Roman Dutch law, and that meant a woman once married could not sign anything for herself. Her husband had to sign for her, and many things like that. And I had also a patriarch father who was a mixed character, to say the least, about these things. And so that was what I was fighting. And then at school, it was pretty good. South Africa, Wits University was very good about women, and so was the AA. They were a bit parental. When I was 3 weeks late for coming back from the spring vacation, they said, well, we were worried about you. They didn't do any more than that. At Penn, it would have been who knows what. But anyway, the point was, that was pretty nice. All the time, from a very early age, the things women are talking about now come on from men. I just said, men have feet of clay, but they were not the kind of thing they report about, this assault. They were just, you saw something in someone's eye, they might have said something, and then you just didn't say anything, and it went away, and you could still love them for what they were, even if you realized that your idols did have certain feet of clay. So that was my experience, luckily nothing more than that. But when Bob and I married, first of all, I'd had a big time getting my associate professorship out of UCLA. They said, join the family as an assistant professor. He almost said, my dear. He didn't say my dear. But he would never have said that to a man. In fact, they were offering a man about 5 years younger than me, with less written record than me, a full professorship. So I was very angry about this, and I began to write that article in anger. And they also said I hadn't published enough. And I said, if I had published enough, you wouldn't have had from me this experience of running the kind of studio you want me to run, which is an interdisciplinary studio. By the time I did the Las Vegas one, I'd been involved in about 8 or 10 studios, starting at Wits and going through the AA, and then through my learning at Wits, and then my teaching at Wits. So I'd had many years of experience, and I knew the way I wanted to go with studios. And then I wrote one for Bob and Kingman Brewster at Yale, which set out all the work projects and things. I'd done the same thing at Penn for another strip. And so I knew what I wanted to do. But I wrote that article partly because they said I hadn't published enough. So I think I wrote it in a day. And then I didn't publish it because by that time people were beginning to tell me that my standing up for myself as a woman, and I wrote it in 72, my standing up for myself as a woman and saying I'd now being alongside a guru who I helped to make a guru. Those 5 years, it was his work and mine, all attributed to him. I said, when I start complaining, architects get furious. And they say, we're tired of hearing all this from Denise Scott Brown. You see? And Philip Johnson was one of the main ones.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article about him. Tucker, what's his name? Carl Tucker asked me to write it for the New York Review, I think it was called, which he then owned. And it caused a catastrophe in Philip Johnson's office. He was very scared of the things I said. I merely reviewed a book and quoted what he said.
But I think it's quite a balanced article on him. You could have really put the knife in, but
yes,
I think
exactly.
it actually gets a very nuanced view of him.
I said that too, but not him.
Yeah.
So
well, he's probably only
it.
used to universal praise, as many men. But in terms of the article Sexism and the star system, you talk about a very entrenched sexism in the profession, which has led to your being written out as some aspects of history.
Yes, and I tried to psychoanalyze it to work out why it's done this way, and I tried to produce a balanced view of it. But I didn't publish it in 1972. It was just too dangerous for our new firm. And so when I did publish it, it still created an outburst, but it also, they were just starting women's studies programs, and it began going into all the women's studies programs. And at that time, I went to a few of those conferences, and they were amazing wound-licking. You had this experience, my God, I've had the same experience, and everyone kind of helped each other that way. And then at that point, I also got too busy with running things in our office and running my own projects in the office, working with various other projects too. And so I really had, and we also had a child, so we had a very tough row to hoe, and I was very happy to see this article, see part like this. Now I want to talk about the Pritzker Prize, because that's when it reared its head again.
Yeah.
And when they called Bob and said he had it, he didn't need to be told now. He said it should go to Denise too. And they said, we'll get back to you. And 2 weeks later, they got back and said, no, it won't.
You're joking.
That's what they said. They went to Philip Johnson. Philip Johnson gave himself the first Pritzker Prize. That one should have gone to Bob. 13 years before. The first one should have gone to Bob, given what he was doing in the field then and how he was turning it over. Philip fought Bob all the way. He set up other architects to praise and all of that to compete with Bob. And so we just pulled away from New York and we did our own thing and we found our own work. Everyone else was looking for work from Philip Johnson, and they had to come in under his skirts, and he called them the kids, and I think he hurt their careers. We managed, partly through me, to pull out of all of that. So that was a situation with the Pritzker, and then people came from Architects Journal to take a film of me for the same reason you are, and they were amazed to hear that I didn't get that Pritzker. They just presumed I did when Bob was given it, and I said no. They went back, and AJ did an editorial challenging the Pritzkers. The Pritzkers have fought, they say you can't rewrite history. And that's Peter Palumbo, and I say, where is his education to think I was saying you rewrite history? I was saying you comment on history. And don't historians do that? Of course they do.
But there was a very nice petition.
The petition was lovely, and now here's what I feel about the petition. It was my Pritzker Prize.
Yeah.
Who else got 20,000 people worldwide all calling her Denise?
Yeah.
But read beyond that, which is lovely. A young man said the best thing of all. He said, 1 + 1 is greater than 2. 1 + 1 is greater than 2. Just lovely. He said the whole thing. You could write a book about that. But at the same time, I called it Mayhew's architecture. Now, from England, you should know what I mean by Mayhew's architecture.
I don't, I'm afraid.
There was something called Mayhew's Journal,
Mm-hmm.
published in 1847, I think, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. He went from borough to borough, speaking to people living in poverty. He was what we call the advocate planner now, taking down what they said and writing a journal of their accounts of their poverty, and he published it. Well, if you go through that whole petition and you read the comments of young men and young women, you will get Mayhew's account of the poverty of life at the beginning stages of architecture worldwide. My work was awarded. I just wasn't mentioned, that's all.
Yes, that's true.
But I think someone now, and I can't get anyone interested, should take up that petition and get out the parts where young people all over the world write an account of what's happening to them now in architecture at that age. Why suddenly all the women leave? You know?
Yeah. Well,
and it would really make a very, very good little book.
Yep.
And the best person to do it is Tom Weaver.
It's Tom Weaver. So, do you have any hope that since you wrote Sexism and the Star System almost 50 years ago, that the situations have changed?
Well, when we were given the AIA gold medal, and the secretaries there told us, for years and years and years we've had to send your submittal back because they wouldn't accept joint submittals, and we were so sad. Well, the secretaries were overjoyed, and the young people were overjoyed, and the whole atmosphere in that award ceremony really augured for a new life in architecture. And I was thrilled with that. But we'll have to see what comes of it.
That's lovely. Because I think one of the disgraces about British architecture is that you and Bob haven't been awarded the RIBA Gold Medal, which is why actually I'm so pleased that the University of Arts is giving you an honorary degree, because I think that your contribution needs to be recognised.
Well, we are very grateful too for that reason, and I've given up on the British.
You've given up, oh, well, we haven't given up on you, Denise. We will keep on barracking the RIBA to recognise what you've done.
Well, you know, while you're about it, people are changing the National Gallery in the most ununderstanding of ways. And that's a real shame.
Okay.
And that's terribly important. And you know, when we were there, Simon Sainsbury is just, he was a love of a guy. Emotional and all of that. We'd fight, but he was just great. And Isaiah Berlin became a very good friend. And he was from Riga.
So he was a trustee?
He was a trustee.
Okay.
He shouldn't have been voting on that board. He never listened to anything. He talked all the way through, and then he said, I'm against the window. But he was really very, very interesting. And I've since then realized that there's something of a chance that actually we are related to him. I wish
nice.
I'd known
Okay.
that before he died,
Right.
because we were such friends.
So Denise, of your own work and the very rich intermingling of looking, learning, writing, practicing, teaching, tell me a bit about how you think all those various aspects have come together in your particular contribution to architecture and urbanism.
I have always liked to draw, to have many legs to my table of architecture, you could say. And so there's this wide view I take, but also a procedural view which can narrow things when it leads to always the two things, both opposite and itself, both things. But also I like to have problems which are very challenging intellectually and visually and aesthetically, all mixed together, and draw something out of that. And then Bob and I together arguing over it and drawing out. But like, I'm almost never involved with the houses he does, and those are kind of he's retired now. He doesn't now. He can't. But they were pilgrimages for him. A little house. He'd try out many things, and I was with him very much in the beginning, not in the design of the Vanaventuri house, but in the critique of it, and looking at various things he's trying and then suggesting it might go this way, and all of that. But then later with the other houses, less. And I brought a certain amount of advocacy planning into our firm. While we were studying Las Vegas, that strip, we were also helping a group of very, very low-income communities fight an expressway on South Street, which was a street where Bob's dad had his fruit and produce store. They wouldn't have accepted us if we hadn't been owners on the street. And I was doing those two projects at once. I was doing Miami Beach, and I was at Princeton, and I once said to Paul Davidoff, look, I believe clients choose architects exactly like themselves. I'm working at Princeton, at Miami Beach, in Las Vegas, and on South Street. He said, I think that's about your span, Denise. So the social planners were my great adversaries and my great loves. They were really my friends. They were really kind, and the architects were kind of removed and brittle, except Bob. Bob was not like that. The only one I would have taken to Las Vegas. So, and we learned together how to set up that kind of program, and I learned from Dave Crane how to set up a planning program, and I joined those two. But first of all, working on these theories courses, Bob and I on one and he on the other, and we began to share. So many of the ideas about questions for the work programs in Las Vegas came out of that place where the theory lecture had to relate to the studio, and I was the one who involved the work programs and thought and requests of the students that would make that relationship. Transferred that a great deal to Las Vegas. So,
but I would say, for me, the bit where all the interconnection between social theory, urban economics, urban theory comes in your work most to focus is in learning from Levittown.
Well, not only, it's right there in the design work I do. And you see, I kept saying to the students, don't become a sociologist, don't become an economist. You work out how to use it as an architect. Well, when I did, for example, the Palmer Drive development at Michigan, which was a large biology teaching library, a large laboratory, a large life sciences laboratory for you. I'm always mixing English and American, and also a student center. And I put these, you know how the Smithsons did Roads in the Air? And how Rem Koolhaas is still supporting those, saying it's not fair to criticize them the way they did. By the way, I fought a lot for the last thing that's being demolished by the Smithsons. I made a little film about that.
About Robin Hood's garden.
Yes, just sad to demolish it. But anyway, so I found a place where there was a big kettle hole, it's called, an old lake, dried out. And I found that the road that everyone was having trouble crossing was at the bottom of that lake, between the main school and the medical school. And I found you could, in fact, put 960 cars, this is Detroit, in that lake. And that looked like just the rest of the campus. And you go straight over without a hump bridge between the medical campus, where they were saying I risk my life where I cross, to the main campus. And these buildings, I did many other things like that about getting places which are public, where the public will actually come, because I've analyzed their routes, I've analyzed their connections, and they do. I've got pictures of them there. That's how I use central place theory in design. Well, they called me, the people in the building office. They said, you'll be the one want to hear about this. We have the construction fences up around your 3 buildings, and the students have discovered the shortcut, and they've taken down our fences, and they're riding their bicycles across to the medical school. And they said, we think you'll love that. Well, you see, that's the kind of, one of my great joys. Boy, I love to see a beautiful building, but I love to see those things happening too.
So tell us about what you're doing at the moment, and actually tell us more about your project about using photography in your practice and in the way that you're developing ideas.
Yes, that's what I'm doing at the moment, but I've done it all my life. But I've only started thinking strategically about all the different ways, starting with, as South Africans who might leave but might then lose our passports, you never knew, and you wanted to see the places, not just see them in books, photograph them and have a record, because you might never go back. So we set off, and Robert Scott Brown had worked as a little boy with his dad. They had a hobby of photography. So we set off, and we were in England, and we traveled, we hitchhiked. We had a Morgan 3-wheeler. It took us all the way through Europe. You don't know that side of my life, working with the Morgan Club, London Cockneys. You see, we had ways of living in London that our friends didn't have.
So Morgan 3-wheeler, for those who don't know, it is a presumably quite a long, low-slung, open car.
It looked like a Morgan sports
Right.
car on the front. At the back, it looked like a Hornet.
Mm-hmm.
And it had one little seat at the back. And it had long since lost its cover. The last ones were made before World War II.
So do you have any pictures of yourself driving around Europe?
Some of those.
So your early use of photography was about recording.
Recording architecture, and then it got to be recording the Morgan Club, and it got to be recording things we loved more, and how the place I lived in, it had an interesting relationship to city streets.
Mm-hmm.
You know those what was it called? It was the ones that the park was in the back, not the front. And Lewis Mumford used to talk about it. It had been an old racetrack, so you went straight from your house into the park. Mm-hmm. And it was in Ladbroke Grove. Mm-hmm. And so looking at those kinds of interesting things and documenting them, and I'm still doing that. I'm looking at things I want to teach my urban design students about. Mm-hmm. And when I first went to America, I'd been taking warehouses in England. I'm an industrial romantic, modified by the Vietnam War, where you can't just be, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm very aware that one of the first mass productions, which were also designed by architects, was Auschwitz. So you can't just be an industrial romantic. You have to be judgmental about where you are. But so the point is, I was learning all of that, and we were photographing in Europe. And then when we came back to South Africa, we did a lot of reading about photography, a lot of thinking about it. And then we started photographing South Africa as if we were going to leave and want to show friends in Germany and England that we'd made what South Africa was like. So I began getting the photographs I now use to tell my students about mixed art and how that applies to Las Vegas too. And so I'm now making a book on that photography and the ones I did in Philadelphia of warehouses and inner city African American life as I was studying all of that. And then when I got to California, I started studying the automobile city in the Southwest, photographing that and Las Vegas a whole lot. So I'd been to Las Vegas to photograph about 4 times before I invited Bob. And I already decided to do a studio at UCLA. And when he came and we fell in love, we'd worked together for 7 years, but we were both of us by then more ready than we were. I was a widow. And then at that time, he loved what he saw there too. And then soon we were going to be married, and I went back and I said, well, now can we do the Las Vegas studio at Yale instead? And they said, yes, please. Yes, please.
But in learning for Las Vegas, the use of photography is incredibly powerful. I mean, you were saying to me earlier that architects don't read, and possibly that's why learning for Las Vegas has been very influential, because the use of photography is so precise in the way that you're framing, the way that you're focusing on things.
Yes, I must say this. That book has lots of my photographs, but it's also got other people's photographs. Peter Schmidt, who lived in England the rest of his life, more or less, he did some very important photography there, and of course Stephen Eisenhower. Yeah. And he became our one who took charge of photography. I got to be too busy. Okay. And so that's a mixture, but what I'm doing now is I'm using as much as I can my own pictures, and if there's some others in, it's only because I haven't recognized them. And I'm now really trying to say, when I was looking at this, this is what I was thinking, and this is what I wanted you to learn. And when I made these composites of some photographs, it's so you would learn these kinds of things. And then I've had a whole career of being a curator, you could say, of photography to give lectures. I gave a lecture a little while ago called Encounters with the Palimpsest. And it was just all about how under the present building that you see, there's, like in Rome, very often the remains of a Roman circus. And my belief that in Denver you might find the remains of a Roman circus. Denver loves that because it's 100 years old. And I say, look, it could have been a Roman circus over here. They say, we always knew Denver was more than 100 years old. But the notion that there is pattern under pattern, and of course there's the geology patterns and the natural patterns. So trying to say form is a result of forces, not only function. Okay. And trying to prove that, trying to get architects to realize it really helps them design not only outside relationships, but inside relationships.
So in the book that you're doing at the moment, where you're revisiting and
Yes.
recomposing the Las Vegas pictures, photographs, are you discovering anything new again?
I'm really trying to make those theses understandable. So it's mostly things like discovering that you could make collages that would show things. I discovered that in the last 5 or 10 years, really. But what I'm doing now is making more of those.
If graduates are going out into this new chaotic world, what's your advice to how to deal with it?
Okay, you are a graduate and you feel, not all of you, but some of you, I see no structure, I don't see where I fit. The advice is, do your work, get to love things, get to love what you do, and that will give you the structure. It'll make you passionate. Your passion will lead you where it leads you. And at the end of your life, you can look back and say, gee, it made much more sense than I thought.
That's lovely. Thank you.